All right, so um, diving into 1974 in Britain,
Okay.
a year that most Brits would probably prefer to forget.
Hmm.
Imagine a time when you couldn't even watch telly.
Yeah.
Limited broadcasts,
Right.
streetlights were dimmed to save power.
Wow.
And, even your favorite football team could only play on Sundays because there weren't enough floodlights
Wow.
for the evening games on the weekdays.
Yeah,
This was
that's wild.
the reality of Britain grappling with a 3-day work week.
It's fascinating just how a seemingly stable democracy
Yeah.
could find itself on the brink
Yeah.
of chaos.
It's kind of surreal,
Yeah.
like something out of a dystopian novel or something.
Yeah.
But this was reality for millions of Brits.
Yeah.
So how did they end up in this situation?
Well, to understand this tumultuous year, we need to look at the man at the helm, Edward Heath,
Okay.
the prime minister,
All right.
elected in 1970.
Okay.
He was a bit of an anomaly for the Conservative Party.
Yeah.
He rose from very humble beginnings, the son of a carpenter and a lady's maid,
Okay.
to lead this party that was, traditionally dominated by the aristocracy.
Yeah. Quite a journey
Quite a journey.
to go from a working class background to the, pinnacle of British politics.
Right.
Do you think that his upbringing shaped his leadership style?
Undoubtedly.
Oh.
He consciously transformed himself, adopting an upper-class accent,
Okay.
embracing hobbies like yachting
Uh.
and classical music,
Right.
This created a perception of him as being out of touch with the common man.
Yeah, and I mean, there's that story
Yeah.
about his shock when a labor friend mentioned spending a weekend with his girlfriend, pretending to be married.
Yes.
It seems like there's a certain rigidity to his personality.
Absolutely. That anecdote really kind of speaks volumes about his worldview
Yeah.
and his moral code.
Yeah.
But it's also important to note his early experiences
Yeah.
played a role as well. His encounters with Nazi leaders in the 1930s,
Hmm.
and then his wartime experiences as well.
Okay.
These really fueled his pro-European stance and this really deep desire for stability.
So essentially, he envisioned this like shiny New Britain,
Yes.
a modernized nation,
Right.
free from the shackles of the past.
Exactly.
And he wasn't afraid to use government intervention
Right.
to achieve that vision.
Correct. He believed in a managed economy, which was, a popular approach at the time.
Yeah.
Even U.S. President Nixon was a proponent of government intervention in the market.
Okay, so that was a kind of common view.
Yes, a common view.
It wasn't just him.
No.
Okay, but this approach actually clashed with the, free market principles
Right.
of the old guard within his own conservative party.
Yeah, the old guard of the Conservative Party was not happy.
So he had kind of resistance from within his own ranks.
Yeah.
On top of that, you've got the escalating violence in Northern Ireland.
Yes.
The tragedy of Bloody Sunday.
Yeah.
And the controversial policy of internment without trial.
Right.
So, I mean, these were pretty challenging times
Incredibly challenging.
for his government to be trying to navigate.
Absolutely. The situation in Northern Ireland was just a complete powder keg.
Yeah.
It was just adding another layer of pressure onto his government.
Right. And then amidst all of this, you've got the trade unions
The trade unions.
gaining significant power in Britain.
Yes.
We're talking about 13 million members here.
13 million members.
And they were often perceived as wielding more influence than the elected officials.
Yeah, more than the politicians.
I mean, that must have been a complex landscape to navigate.
Extreme. The irony is there were thousands of these unions.
Wow.
All kind of squabbling amongst themselves.
Okay.
So imagine trying to negotiate with this incredibly fragmented force.
Yeah, that does not sound easy.
A logistical and political nightmare.
Wow. And then you have the National Union of Mine Workers,
The NUM.
or NUM.
Yes.
A real powerhouse in its own right. Their 1972 strike for better pay
Right.
showed that they could bring the country to a standstill.
They could.
I mean, that strike was a real turning point, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a real turning point.
Because the public really sympathized with the miners.
They did, yeah.
They recognized how dangerous their work was,
Absolutely.
and the government was forced to capitulate to their demands.
They were.
So Heath, facing mounting pressure from the unions,
Right.
determined to control inflation,
Yeah.
he comes up with stage 3, this incomes policy that aimed to limit pay raises.
Okay.
But the thing is, some people argued that this policy,
Yeah.
with its built-in threshold payments, that would automatically increase wages if inflation rose above a certain level was actually inherently inflationary.
Interesting.
His chancellor, Anthony Barber, he was at the same time pursuing this, dash for growth strategy, pumping money into the economy while hoping that stage 3 would keep inflation in check.
Wow, so it was a bit of a gamble.
It seems that way.
Yeah.
And then, as if things weren't complicated enough, the Yom Kippur War breaks out in the Middle East. Followed by the OPEC oil embargo, the global economy is plunged into turmoil.
And the impact was absolutely devastating.
Especially for an oil-dependent nation like Britain.
Exactly. One historian likened it to the entire country giving itself a 20% pay raise overnight.
Wow.
Inflation just soared.
Wow. And those threshold payments in Heath's Stage 3 policy?
Oh.
I mean, they were triggered repeatedly.
Yes.
Which just added fuel to the inflationary fire.
Yeah.
Classic case of unintended consequences, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then the NUM, emboldened by the oil crisis and their new leverage over the country. They rejected Stage 3 outright.
Wow.
And they demanded a 35% pay increase.
35%?
I mean, they knew they held the energy lifeline of the nation in their hands.
Yeah, they had the country over a barrel, you could say.
So how did Heath respond to this?
Well, he attempted to negotiate. But his rigid adherence to these policies and this perceived inability to connect with the union leaders on a personal level, it made progress really difficult.
So it sounds like the stage was set for a showdown.
Definitely a showdown brewing. The crisis was deepening, and Heath's government actually implemented a 3-day working week.
Wow.
For businesses. Introduced drastic energy-saving measures. It's even said that they pressured the Queen to rewrite her Christmas message. To remove any mention of the country's difficulties.
Wow.
So talk about trying to control the narrative.
It seems like the government was in real denial about the severity of the situation.
Yeah, they seem to be.
It sounds like they were really struggling to grasp the reality.
I think so.
What was going on. So let's explore the impact of the 3-day work week. On everyday life in Britain. You know what it was actually like to live through that time? And, yeah, we'll get into that right after this. So we were talking about this 3-day work week in Britain. I mean, could you imagine a modern economy functioning like that?
It was a drastic measure, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, streets were darkened to conserve energy. Television broadcasts were limited. And, people turned to board games and candlelight for entertainment.
It's like stepping back in time, almost.
It really is.
There must have been this collective sense of anxiety, right?
Absolutely.
Like this feeling that everything familiar was being disrupted. Did this shared experience kind of bring people together, or did it actually exacerbate existing divisions?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I mean, you had these interesting social consequences. Sunday football matches became the norm because there just wasn't enough electricity for floodlights during the week.
Wow.
And even the Daily Mail was offering advice on how couples could use their extra time at home to spice up their love lives.
Okay, so a mix of, blitz spirit and a touch of absurdity. But was it really as bad as the government made it out to be?
Well, the winter of 73-74 was actually quite mild. And, there weren't these widespread power cuts that everyone was expecting. Which actually undermined Heath's attempts to blame the miners for all the disruption.
So it kind of backfired on him.
It did, a bit.
Public opinion started to shift, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean, even the actor Kenneth Williams. Known for his comedic roles. He wrote in his diary about overhearing people on a crowded train blaming the government.
Not the miners.
Not the miners for the 3-day week.
So Heath's strategy wasn't working?
No, it really wasn't.
It seems like people weren't buying the narrative that the miners were solely responsible for the country's woes. And it was around this time that the Trade Union Congress, or TUC, representing all these different unions,
a broad coalition,
offered to broker a deal.
Their
proposal is pretty simple, right? Give the miners the 35% raise they're asking for. And in return, they'd guarantee that other unions wouldn't try to exploit the situation.
A pragmatic solution.
It sounds like it could have been a chance for Heath to de-escalate the crisis.
It could have been.
Regain some control.
Right.
But he refused.
He did.
Why?
Well, some say he was blinded by his ideological commitment to controlling inflation. And this deep distrust of unions. He saw it as giving in a slippery slope. A capitulation that would set a dangerous precedent.
So stubbornness or maybe just unwavering belief in his own policies
Perhaps.
led him to reject this potential way out.
And the consequences were significant.
What happened?
The NUM, they saw no other option.
Okay.
They launched a full-scale strike in February of '74.
Okay.
And this really escalated the confrontation.
Deepened the sense of crisis.
Absolutely. And it's at this point that a key figure in Heath's inner circle, Sir William Armstrong, the head of the civil service, and a real symbol of this technocratic approach to governing. He suffers a complete mental breakdown.
Oh, wow.
It's almost Shakespearean. I mean, this brilliant, dedicated public servant starts exhibiting paranoia, ranting about communist infiltration, lecturing on the Bible and sex while lying on the floor.
What?
There are even anecdotes about him conducting meetings with senior officials while lying on his back.
Wow.
Or receiving the governor of the Bank of England completely naked.
That's incredible.
It's a bizarre turn of events, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, does this suggest that the pressure of the crisis was just too much for him?
Perhaps. It's hard to say for sure.
Yeah.
But it definitely reflects the intense stress and weight of responsibility that, those at the heart of government were carrying.
Right.
And it hints at this darker undercurrent of fear and paranoia that was starting to permeate British society.
And amidst all of this chaos, his government seemingly on the verge of collapse.
Right.
Heath makes this bold, maybe desperate decision. He calls a snap election for February 28th. Hoping to secure a mandate from the people to confront the miners and restore order.
So a gamble?
A real gamble.
Yeah, a last-ditch effort to regain control.
But even if he won,
right,
the problems wouldn't just magically disappear.
They wouldn't.
The miners weren't likely to just back down just because he'd been reelected.
Exactly.
So what was he hoping to achieve?
Well, maybe he genuinely believed he could win a clear victory and crush the miners' resistance. Or maybe it was just this desperate attempt to cling to power.
I mean, it's difficult to know what was going through his mind.
It is, but to add to the drama, you have Idi Amin, the dictator of Uganda, offering to create a Save Britain fund and send aid.
Wow, that's
mocking, of course.
Yeah, I mean, that really highlights how far Britain's standing had fallen on the world stage.
It does.
In his final address to the nation before the election, Heath poses this stark question.
Okay.
Who governs the country? The elected government or a powerful group of workers?
Wow, so he's really framing it as a battle for the soul of Britain.
It seems that way.
Yeah, he's asking voters to choose between his vision of this modernized, efficient Britain with the government firmly in control or a future where powerful unions can hold the country hostage.
So the stage was set for this pivotal election.
Real turning point.
Would the British people rally behind their embattled prime minister? Or would they deliver a verdict on his leadership?
We'll have to see.
And that's exactly what we'll delve into when we come back for the final part of our deep dive into 1974 Britain.
All right, looking forward to it.
We're back, and last time we left Edward Heath facing this, crucial election.
Yeah.
His premiership was hanging by a thread.
It really was a pivotal moment for Britain.
The nation was divided.
Deeply.
The economy was in turmoil.
Total turmoil.
And there was, this specter of social unrest looming.
Yeah, a real sense of unease.
And remember that whole thing about potential communist infiltration in the government?
Oh, yes.
I mean, did that play a role in the election?
Absolutely. The right-wing press. They were already very critical of Heath's, handling of the economy.
Right.
They saw him as weak in the face of the unions.
Okay.
And they seized upon Armstrong's breakdown as proof of this sinister plot to undermine the British state.
So there were these whispers of conspiracy.
Yeah, whispers everywhere.
Fueled by all those Cold War anxieties.
Exactly.
Did Heath address these accusations?
He didn't really engage with them directly. Maybe he thought it would legitimize them.
Okay, so he just ignored them.
He kind of sidestepped the issue.
Okay, and focused on restoring order?
Yeah, projecting strength and stability.
Okay, meanwhile, Harold Wilson and the Labour Party, they were offering a very different vision, weren't they?
They were. Wilson was a shrewd politician.
Yeah.
Very experienced.
Yeah.
And he capitalized on the public's frustration.
With the 3-day week.
With the 3-day week.
The perceived incompetence of Heath's government.
He promised a more conciliatory approach to the unions.
Okay.
Emphasizing dialogue and compromise.
So it sounds like he was tapping into that desire for a return to normalcy.
Yeah, a rejection of that confrontational style
Right.
had defined Heath's time in office.
And it resonated with voters.
It did.
So what were the results?
Well, when the results came in, it was clear the British people had delivered their verdict.
Did Heath manage to pull off an upset?
Not quite. The election actually resulted in a hung parliament.
A hung parliament.
Yeah, no party secured an outright majority.
Wow, what a twist.
That was a dramatic turn of events.
So what happened next?
Well, after several days of, intense negotiations, Wilson actually managed to form a minority labor government.
Okay.
With the support of the Liberals.
So Heath's gamble backfired.
It did, spectacularly.
He called an election hoping to strengthen his position.
Right.
And ended up losing his job.
It's a classic case of political hubris.
It seems that way.
He misjudged the public mood. And overplayed his hand.
So was his downfall just, down to his personality?
I mean, that was certainly part of it.
Okay.
His rigid personality.
Right.
His inability to connect with ordinary people.
Yeah.
His perceived arrogance.
Okay.
Clinging to policies that clearly weren't working. And his failure to grasp the shifting political landscape.
But can we really blame him for everything?
Yeah, that's a good question.
I mean, there were these larger forces at play.
Absolutely. He was operating in extraordinary circumstances.
The oil crisis.
The oil crisis, yeah.
The violence in Northern Ireland.
Right.
The growing power of the unions. A global economy in flux.
It was a perfect storm.
Even the most skilled leader would have struggled.
I think so. It's fascinating, though, isn't it?
What is?
How personal leadership styles intersect with these global events to create these moments of national crisis.
It's almost like fate, in a way.
Yeah, but what's really intriguing about this period...
What is it?
...is that it revealed these deep structural issues...
Within British society?
Within British society that had been simmering for decades.
So it wasn't just about Heath?
Not entirely, no. The decline of traditional industries...
Okay.
The rise of new economic powers.
Yeah.
The changing social landscape. These forces were already reshaping Britain. And the events of '74 just brought them into focus.
So even if Heath had made different choices, Britain would still have faced these challenges.
Most likely, yes.
'74 was just a catalyst.
A catalyst for change.
Exposing the cracks in the system.
Exactly.
So what about those whispers of communist infiltration?
Yes.
Or they just fade away?
Well, those seeds of paranoia...
Yeah.
They actually blossomed into a full-blown national obsession.
During Wilson's second term?
During Wilson's second term, yeah.
Wow.
Allegations of espionage.
Okay.
Shadowy figures lurking in the corridors of power.
It sounds like something out of a spy novel.
It does, doesn't it?
But this was real.
This was the reality of British politics for years to come.
Wow. So 1974 was just the beginning of a turbulent period for Britain.
It was a pivotal year.
It exposed the vulnerabilities.
The vulnerabilities of a nation.
Grappling with economic uncertainty.
Right.
Social change.
And the legacy of its imperial past.
A lot to unpack there.
Definitely.
Well, we've reached the end of our deep dive into 1974 Britain.
A fascinating year.
A year that reminds us that history is messy.
It is, full of twists and turns.
And often unpredictable.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us on this journey.
It's been a pleasure.
And be sure to subscribe to The Deep Dive for more explorations of the past.
We'll see you next time.